for attending today's live webinar, How to Find Podcasts. Joining me today is Susan Winkler. My name is Rebecca Van Dusen. Susan Winkler is the technology librarian here at the Champaign Public Library. I am a library associate and I assist Susan with the webinars, teaching, and behind the scenes. I also work at the information desk. We're going to be co-teaching this class, so we'll be going back and forth doing demonstrations as well as some theoretical stuff about how to find podcasts. But let's go ahead and explain some of the stuff that's going on with Zoom. So near the bottom of your Zoom screen, you'll see some controls pop up if you move your mouse over them. So kind of more at the bottom left side, you'll see an option for changing your audio settings, like changing your speaker or microphone. If you move towards the center bottom, you'll see a chat bubble and a raise hand option. So the chat bubble sort of looks like a bubble that you might see in a comic strip that looks like just like a chat bubble, I guess. If you click on that, that will let you get into the chat where we will be helping to answer questions during the webinar. And the raise hand option is also used to ask questions. So if you want to raise your hand, we'll let you speak your question out loud rather than having to type it into the chat. But no matter what, just be aware that we will be available at any time to help. Don't feel like you're interrupting if you're asking a question. That's what we're here for, and that's what we hope to do with this webinar. So yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have in terms of Zoom. Let's go ahead and get started. Susan, how are you today?
Good. Just going to add that in the chat here real quick. Okay. So yes, and also we do send out an email post webinar where we will include the link to the video for you as well. Yes, I don't know if you mentioned that or not. You might have.
No, I haven't. That's why you're here.
I was also typing in the chat at the same time, so I was like split focus.
I was also going to say I am going to put the link to the handout for today's class in the chat. So if you want the handout, you'll be able to click on that link and then it will be able to pop up on your computer and you can save it if you like. We'll also send this handout digitally to you via email after the recording is ready. So it'll have the link to the recording as well as the handout. So you'll have that afterwards.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have the PowerPoint for us today, which will get us started. Let me go ahead and open up my, let's see. I want to go into, let's go to share screen. And, okay, 1 second. Oh, apparently I still have to open it. Sorry. One moment. Well, I jump in here. I grabbed it and then I didn't open it. All right. 1 second. All righty. Now I will share the screen. All righty, and I'm hoping here in a second you will see how to find podcasts.
Yes.
And we'll go ahead and open it from the beginning. All right, so thanks for joining us for today's workshop. Our webinar is how to find and listen to podcasts. We are happy that you're joining us and hopefully you'll get to discover some new podcasts and or learn what podcasts are today. So what we'll start with, just like most of our tech workshops, we'll start with what are podcasts, who creates them, when and where can you find them and listen to them, and then more specifically, how to find podcasts using a topical search within a podcast app or doing internet searches and specific review sites. And then, of course, all of us probably have family and friends who recommend certain podcasts that they listen to that then they think you might also enjoy. And that also includes through social media too. Of course, if someone's on Facebook and they mention how great a podcast is, I'm probably gonna check it out. Okay. All right. We'll also talk about whether or not the apps cost money. So the ones that we're going to demo for you today, they do not cost any money, but there are podcast apps out there that you can purchase, which have some special features, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are. We will talk about whether or not you want to subscribe to a podcast or to just grab individual episodes as you see fit. We'll talk a little bit about devices. So for most of us, we're probably listening via our either Android phone or our Apple phone or our maybe an iPad or a tablet. But your device might matter for which of those specific apps works better. And then we're going to talk about the two platforms we're going to cover today, which is going to be Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts, which Apple would be for iPhone, iPad, and then Google Podcasts is basically for your Android phone or tablet. We'll go over some terms and definitions, and then we'll talk about some resources. And then I think this is Rebecca's favorite part, but we'll talk about our recommended listens. So not only do you get recommended podcasts from friends and family, you also get them from your library webinar hosts.
Yes, it is one of my favorite parts.
So we'll go ahead and jump right in here with what are podcasts. So podcasts have been around for a little while now. Right around the introduction of the Apple iPod was when podcasting kind of became a thing. And basically it's a combination of the word iPod, excuse me, and broadcast. And that's how you get podcasts. And the idea is it's basically a spoken word audio program that you can listen to, excuse me, on demand through the internet, or you can download it to a specific device. There are standalone episodes or an episodic structure, and sometimes things have seasons to them. Excuse me, goodness. Typically it differs from internet radio because you're not listening live, but you can download them at any time. Goodness, pardon me. So there are lots of possible subjects. It's pretty much whatever you care about. You know, it might be something related to work or a hobby of yours. It's pretty much on your own. It's basically like your own on-demand radio station of topics that you care about. There are different formats, including interview format, commentary, panels, narrative fiction or nonfiction clips. I listen to some where they comment on a TV show that I like, or any kind of fandom too. And the tone does vary by the content and subject area type. So you might have something where it's a very irreverent and fun, or you might have something where it's basically like critical commentary on a book that you've read. They are typically free, and one of the ways that they support themselves, the podcasters themselves and the hosts, is usually that they have ads that are sponsored by different companies. So typically the podcast itself is free, but you do end up listening to ads. Sometimes you can get different versions where it's a paid version where it doesn't have ads. I know this is true for Slate. Slate does things where you can have Slate Plus. If you're a Slate Plus subscriber, that means you pay a little bit of money and you can listen to the different podcasts without the ads. Podcasts are not subject to FCC broadcast decency rules or approval or standards. So they may or may not include, you know, swear words or explicit content because they are not being broadcast over the regulated airwaves where the FCC, you know, like with TV shows where they have to bleep things and stuff like that. You may find podcasts where they do that. And you might also find a podcast where there's a version where things are bleeped or pared down so that they're more family friendly. And then there's a version that is less family friendly. That also, I have seen that as well. Okay, any questions about sort of the basic beginning idea behind what they are and what podcasts are? And
I don't see any questions so far.
Okay, well then I'm going to go ahead and let Rebecca take the next section.
All right. So who creates these podcasts? So there's a lot of different creators out there. So they can include companies or organizations, right? So for instance, you may listen to a podcast that's produced by the BBC. Maybe the New York Times has a podcast out. NPR does them, Fox, ESPN. There's tons of organizations and companies that will create content. There's also famous people, right? So you may have a podcast that's hosted or created by a famous person. So for instance, Conan O'Brien has a podcast. There was a podcast recently that was Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen, which I found very interesting.
Sorry.
So you may have celebrities and entertainment industry professionals working together to create a podcast. There's also podcast networks. So these are networks created that may have a whole bunch of different subject podcasts within their network. So for instance, Earwolf is a pretty popular podcast network, WNYC Studios, Radiotopia. There's a bunch of different networks. And podcasts can also be created by fans of particular topics or shows. So that's what's cool about podcasts, is that it's kind of for anyone. So you may know somebody that creates their own podcast and has it up for their friends to listen to. It can really be anybody that creates these things. And we just have a list kind of on the right-hand side of some examples of some podcasts that are created. So Rick Steves is a popular travel writer and travel host. He's on television. He has a podcast. Bill Nye has a podcast. Bill Nye, the Science Guy, you may have heard of him. LeVar Burton has a podcast. There's also podcasts for certain shows, like there's an Outlander podcast. I know I've listened to podcasts for Game of Thrones. Anything you can think of, really, you can search it and see if there's a podcast out there. There's probably going to be one nowadays. They're pretty popular. So when and where can you listen to these? So pretty much they're on demand. As soon as the podcast is live, you can listen to it. As long as you're connected to the internet and able to get that podcast, you can listen to it. With the Apple Podcast app and the Google Podcast app, you can actually download those to your device and listen to them offline. You can listen in your car, you can listen on your device. When I say in your car, you may have Bluetooth connectivity in your car that allows you to listen to things through your device. I know in my car, I am able to connect my phone to my car radio so I can listen to my podcasts on the way to work. Maybe I'm doing chores and I want to listen to my podcasts while I'm doing that. I often will listen to podcasts if I'm playing video games or if I'm crafting. I like to do a lot of hands-on crafting where I can't look at something, but I can listen to something. So I like to listen to podcasts then. I mean, really, you can listen to them anytime you'd like. I personally like to do it when I'm doing chores and stuff like that. It helps me pass the time. I'm sure Susan
Same.
has her own time that she listens to them.
Yes, yeah, same. When I'm doing chores, like washing dishes and things like that,
Yes,
we'll have them playing on our phones, or when we're on long car trips, driving back and forth between here and wherever we're visiting. A lot of times we'll listen to some of the longer podcasts that we like.
Yep, I just traveled home for the holidays and we had a couple podcasts lined up that we listened to, and it helped to pass the time really nicely.
Same. And we did it through Bluetooth in the car. Some of you may also have like a USB connection in your car where you can plug in the USB cord and get it to your from your phone so that it'll still play out of the speakers. That's how we normally do it, but our USB for some reason wasn't working. So we were doing it all via Bluetooth. So
yeah, I find that most cars now is pretty
to
standard to have either one of those.
Yeah, and since luckily we have both, it was, if one wasn't working, we could switch to the other method. So yeah.
Any questions so far? Or comments, maybe comments where you like to listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Or if you haven't heard, if you don't have any in mind already, you're in the right place for us to give you some suggestions for where to find them.
Yes.
Okay, so speaking of that, wasn't that that was a great segue that I just did, right?
Perfect
into the next, yeah, good transition. So how to find podcasts. Some things to consider when you start on your journey toward podcasting. It can be pretty overwhelming because if you have lots of hobbies or varied interests, you can find, as Rebecca said, you can find podcasts on just about anything. So it can be a little overwhelming. So here are some things that I like to consider before I look into a new podcast. What do you already enjoy listening to? Do you already enjoy listening to certain radio programs? Do you enjoy listening to certain types of music? Do you enjoy certain kinds of, like pop songs? Or are you more into documentaries or things like that? That will kind of help narrow down what you might find to be useful as a podcast too. What are your interests or hobbies? Are you looking for something that is going to relate to your professional or career podcast? So for example, I listen to a couple of library podcasts, a couple where they talk about different books that I listen to so that I can be a better reader as well as a better recommender of different topics. And then I also listen to some technology podcasts so that I can be aware of what's going on in the world of technology. And then besides that, I have photography as one of my hobbies. So I listen to a couple of photography podcasts. So I kind of have a mix and match of professional and career goal podcasts that I listen to, as well as stuff that matches my hobbies. You may want to consider if you want to do total fiction or nonfiction. If you want to go the fiction side, like the LeVar Burton reads, that's LeVar Burton reading works of fiction or nonfiction. And there are some where it's episodic structure of just, we're going to read a classic this week. So it's somebody reading, a chapter from a classic work of fiction. Do you like the documentary style? Or, would you rather have something that's based on a story or very episodic? You'll want to also consider whether or not you want episodes that you have to hear in order. So for example, something that's story-based, you may episode 1 through episode 5, you may not want to start with episode 5 when they're doing the end of the story. It may have to have that sequence to it. Some other casts though, you can jump in anywhere. And you can even go back, and we'll show you how to do this in the podcast apps, where you can jump back and see previous episodes all the way back to when the podcast began. And you can go back and sort of catch up on what was happening at that time period. You might also be interested in how often the podcast comes out with a new episode. Some podcasts it's weekly, some podcasts it's once a month, some podcasts it's once every couple of months, and some you'll notice, oh, this is a really great idea, really great content, and then it's once every 6 months or so, just depending on when the folks who came up with the idea for it can get to have the time to record a new episode. So those are some things to consider. When you're ready to start looking and finding, you can do topical searches within podcast apps, which we're both going to demonstrate in the podcast apps that we're going to show today. You can also just do an internet search. If I go out there and say I'm really into learning about crocheting, I could go and do, crochet podcast and just see what comes up in either a Google search or, DuckDuckGo search or whatever. There are also review sites for podcasts like podcastreview.org. And you can go there and you can look to see what podcasts they've reviewed in your certain subject area. You can also look at podcast industry newsletters. These are also interesting if you're kind of curious about, what devices someone most often listening to a podcast on, and some of that statistical analysis too, which also could be beneficial if you decide eventually that you want to start your own podcast. And then again, recommendations from social media, family, friends, coworkers, or even just going in and saying, on an internet search, the top 10 photography podcasts of 2021. And just, you'll see tons of people that are involved in the industry of photography talking about their favorite podcasts or new podcasts that came out this year that they think are really worthwhile for people to listen to. So those are the general gist of it. And we can demonstrate each one of these too once we're done with the demonstrations of the apps too. So any questions about some examples of where to find the podcasts?
I don't see any so far.
All right. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on.
All right, so we talked very briefly about cost, but that is something also to consider when you're thinking about podcasting. For the most part, listening to podcasts is free, but there are versions that you can pay for that will give you additional content, or they may be ad-free options. So we've listed a couple of different services. So for instance, you may have heard of Stitcher Premium. It's free, but there is a paid version that allows for ad-free listening. additional content, there's archives of shows, and then you may get early access to content. So this is pretty common with a lot of the services that you may pay extra for, right? There is a free version, but with the paid version, you'll get those extra features. I personally listen to the Apple Podcasts. I use the Apple Podcast app, but there's tons more out there, and it's really up to you to find out which one you like the best and which one works for what you need it for. You don't also have to use an app either. You can also stream apps using a web browser. So some podcasts have a free player that's available on their website. So if you like a certain podcast, you may find that their website on an internet browser has that player on there, and you can just listen that way. I find that's easier if you're on a desktop computer to listen that way. And if you're on a device like a smartphone or a tablet, it may be easier to use the app. So consider that when you're thinking about using podcasts. Next slide, please. So you may also think about subscribing or not subscribing to a podcast. So subscribing to a podcast, Apple Podcast refers to this as following. Basically, what you're going to do is you're going to get all of those podcasts coming into your app that are from the shows that you have decided to follow or to subscribe. So if there's a new episode, you'll have it pop up. And of course, I'll show this when we're doing demos, but you'll have those new episodes pop up in a special section where all your subscriptions are. There is an advantage to subscribing. Like I was just saying, you'll get those, you may get notified of new episodes rather than having to go out and search and see if there are new episodes. You can also choose to download things to your device or stream them. That doesn't really count whether or not you subscribe, but that is a possibility as well. And sometimes people use the subscribe button. I should say, if you like what you hear, most apps will have a subscribe button, but you can also sort of preview a podcast without subscribing to it. So you can just visit the podcast and listen to an individual episode before you decide to subscribe. So subscribing is not a requirement to listen to a podcast, but it's nice because it will help you sort of follow and keep up with the newest content that your podcast puts out, if that makes sense.
We should also mention that if you subscribe to something and then you no longer want to listen to it, you can always unsubscribe to. So it's not that you're committed to through the end of time.
Right.
You can always unsubscribe whenever you want.
And I've done the thing before where I've heard someone has told me a podcast is really good and I should listen to a particular show, and I go and I listen to the first episode before I subscribe. That way I don't have to constantly keep up with the notifications about the new episodes or something like that. I can just listen to that first one, and if I really like it, then I'll subscribe. But that's me. I mean, you may have a different experience when you use your podcast app.
And for me, sometimes when people recommend something, I'll go in and listen to the most recent episode, and then I'll go check something from the back catalog a while, that happened maybe 6 months ago, and listen to that and say, okay, I usually have to give it at least 2 episodes before I decide to commit to subscribing.
Yeah.
So, and then sometimes there's individual episodes that people will recommend because it's a particularly good, it's either a particularly good interview or maybe that's the actor that you're especially fond of and want to hear their thoughts. So you don't want to subscribe. You just want to go and listen to that one episode, and you can.
Yeah. There's unlimited possibilities, really.
Yes. Okay. You ready for the next? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
No, you're good. That's exactly what I was hoping for. So your device might also matter. You'll see that little chart there on the right side, the most commonly used apps for listening to podcasts among podcast users from 2019. It looks like Apple Podcasts was the #1, and then Spotify, and then it says Google Play Music. That's no longer a thing anymore. It's Google Podcasts, but that's a pretty popular format. And of course, you don't need an app to listen to a podcast. You can listen on a laptop, a desktop computer without an app. Of course, you would just visit the website for the podcast, And usually for the most part, they would have a player on that website. If they don't, they would tell you. And different apps may have different experiences, right? You may have different playback speeds on different apps. Certain apps may allow you to sync across devices. So for instance, Apple Podcasts, I can listen to on my iPad and have the same experience as I do on my iPhone. So that might be also something you're wanting to consider, because you may listen to your podcast on your iPad at home, but then you want to travel and you want to take that experience with you, right? With your iPhone. So maybe you have your iPhone in your car and you listen to it, but you still have that same experience. You're still getting the same updates from your favorite podcasts. So that might be something to consider when you're thinking about a podcast app. And I think that's pretty much it for right now before we jump into the demonstration portion, unless anybody has any questions.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen with the PowerPoint. And then I will spotlight Rebecca here.
All right, and I'll go ahead and jump right into my demonstration part here.
Yeah.
Okay, let me get I am going to be demonstrating on an iPad, and we're going to be first going over the Apple Podcasts app. So let me jump into that. I'm going to also turn off the light just so it doesn't have that reflection from the overhead light. Just give me 1 second. All right, you seeing that okay?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right, let me focus it just a little bit to make sure it looks all right. Where's my remote? There we go. Okay.
So we're both using document cameras today too. So if you do notice that something's super fuzzy, just let us know in the chat and so we can adjust it. I am monitoring it on my side, and Rebecca will be monitoring it on her side when each of us is presenting. But if you notice something, please let us know so that we can correct it.
Yes. All right, so I'm on my iPad and we're going to be using the Apple Podcasts app. So the Apple Podcasts app should come native to your device, but if you don't have it, you can visit your app store and search for it there. It looks like this. It's a purple sort of looking app that's got a little figure with sort of this antenna wave length thing going on here.
I always kind of thought it looked like a microphone.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. It does kind of look like a microphone. I always thought it looked like a person. I guess it could be either one.
Could be either. It could be the person doing their podcast or the microphone they're speaking into, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to go ahead and jump right in. I'm going to tap on that podcast app to open it. And the first thing that it's going to jump to is the Listen Now menu. You'll see there's a couple of different options for menu that I can jump into right from this screen. Let me see if I can lower that brightness just a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little hard to make out the words down at the bottom.
Let me zoom in on them so you can see them a little easier as well. Oops. There we go. So it says Listen Now, Browse, Library, and Search. So those are the different menus that you can jump between within the Apple Podcasts app. So when you first open the app, it should be on the Listen Now menu, but if it's not, it will be on one of these other menus here. So let me come back out here and we'll go through the Listen Now menu. Okay, is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, so the Listen Now menu is going to have a list of your podcast subscriptions, or I should say the podcasts that you follow, because the Apple Podcasts app does not use the word subscription, it uses the word follow. So you'll be following a podcast rather than being subscribed. It's still the same idea, they just use a different word. So that's going to have a list of the podcasts that you follow. So where it says up next here, these are all the newest episodes from the podcasts that you follow. So for us, it's showing a new episode of Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, a new episode of Unspooled, a new episode of Conan O'Brien's podcast, and a new episode of My Favorite Murder, which is a true crime podcast. It's also going to show, if you scroll down, it's going to give you some suggestions of channels to try. So this may be sort of a list that Apple has created based on some of the stuff that you listen to already. So this may change depending on when you open it or depending on what you have subscribed to. So this might look different on yours. And of course, it's also going to give you a little more recommendation options here. So stuff may basically based on your listening, stuff you may like. So you can scroll through those and see. You can also go down here more to discover. They give you a lot of stuff to kind of look through on here. So it's kind of nice to have the recommendations. It also gives you recommendations based on stuff you're following already. So for instance, we follow Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and it's got some other podcasts that we might like since we have that one in our subscriptions. And then TV and film. It's also going to show episodes that we've recently played. So episodes of podcasts that we may have already listened to, or we maybe want to revisit those. We can do that as well. And go back up to the top here. You'll also notice that there is a little icon over here, kind of looks like an anonymous person. If I were to click on that, that's going to get me into my account settings. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but that's from this screen here. Okay, let's talk about the browse screen next. So that's the button right to the right of the Listen Now button. And the browse button is going to let us browse podcasts by interest, popularity, genre, stuff like that. So if you're looking for a new podcast to listen to, this might be a screen that you want to visit. So you'll see there is some mini series I can listen to. There's some new podcasts that they want to show off, some best podcasts of the year here, it looks like for 2021. Some episodes that have been popular. There's also some of these kind of genre lists that they've created here. So I can explore top charts, stuff that's trending, maybe favorite podcasts, award-winning. So these are kind of lists. Let's go in award-winning and see what happens. So it looks like there's some Peabody Award winner, Pulitzer Prize winners. So these are just going to kind of be lists that Apple has crafted and put on the app. And again, these may change depending on when you're accessing the app. They may change depending on the season as well. So during Halloween, maybe you find some spooky podcasts. So yeah, I recommend kind of going into your browse menu and just looking around, seeing what's out there. There should also be, let's see. Yep, it looks like there's top episodes and top shows. So these would be the top shows of, I think, of the day. So whatever the most people are listening to right now, as well as top episodes. I think there is also a list of genres. Let's see. Maybe it's in the search menu. I think that's in the search menu. But that is the browse menu. Let's go to the library menu next. So that's to the right here. So the library menu is going to display the podcasts in a grid here. These are the ones that I follow. It's also going to show me a list here on the side of maybe shows that I've saved or downloaded. And latest episodes would be the podcasts that I follow, whichever is the latest. So the most recent would be up here at the top. And as I scroll down, it's going to go backwards in time. So that's kind of a nice little menu if you're looking to catch up on some stuff that you follow. I know for me, I'm always in this menu because I am always behind on stuff. So it's a nice, convenient way to look at stuff that you've missed or are needing to catch up on.
I think, Rebecca, if I can interrupt, that's also what happens when if you subscribe to a new podcast and you add it, it'll go in the most recent episode of that podcast will go into the latest episodes. And then if you want to look at previous episodes, you can go in here too, and it'll add it in there, and then you can catch back up if you need to.
Yes. Saved is if you want to save a particular episode, maybe you want to make sure you're listening to it later. Maybe you don't have time right now, you want to save the episode. We're going to talk about how to save an episode, but they live here in the library menu. All right, let's go ahead and go to the search menu. So the search menu is going to pull up this search bar here where you can search, or you can browse the different categories. So like I was saying with browse, there wasn't a genre category thing that we could browse through, but this here will let you do that. So maybe you're looking for history podcasts. I could click on that, and then I can browse through the history podcasts. Let me go back to our search menu. Now, the cool thing about search is you can search podcasts by title, but you can always also use specific words, phrases. You can search by creator, you can search actors, you can search basically anything. So maybe you had heard that a particular actor gave an interview and you weren't sure what podcast they were on, you could search it and then they would pop up. So maybe if I heard that Elijah Wood just recently did a podcast, I could search his name. And then it should pull up. It's got shows, so maybe he was on a particular show, but it should have episodes as well. Here we go. It looks like he was a guest on a couple of different podcasts, and it will tell you the year here too. So this was June of this year, but it goes back, it looks all the way back to 2011 on some shows. And it's good to keep in mind that sometimes it may just be pulling from the description of the show. So maybe it's not guest starring him at all, but it's got him in the description. So keep that in mind when you're searching. And you'll notice up here too, it says all podcasts, sorry, that's hard to say, all podcasts or your library. So all podcasts would be across the internet, all the podcasts that are out there on the internet. Your library would just be stuff that maybe you are subscribed to or you have downloaded. So I could click on your library and this would show stuff that just I'm connected with. So it looks like there is maybe an episode that talks about Elijah Wood in my Unspoiled podcast. Unspooled, I'm sorry, not unspoiled. All right, so that's the search menu. Does anybody have questions so far about Apple Podcasts?
I don't see any questions so far, but if you do have questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you so that you can ask your question out loud.
Yes. Okay, let's go ahead and figure out how to follow a podcast. So maybe you really like a podcast and you want to follow them so they're showing up in your feed every day. So let's search for one that I use pretty often is the Neil deGrasse Tyson podcast. He has one called Star Talk. So again, I just did a search here from my search menu. I typed Star Talk into my search bar. And of course, it's going to show a bunch of stuff that's got those search terms. But I'm looking for Star Talk with Neil deGrasse Tyson. So I'm going to tap on that cover image. And it's going to take me to a page that's all about his podcast. So it's got information about the podcast itself, so I can read a little description here. I can also scroll down and see the episodes. So maybe I was wanting to get a certain episode that I had heard of. I can come here and look for the episode. It looks like this particular podcast has 725 episodes. I can also follow the podcast right from this page. If you notice up in the top right corner here, and let me zoom in a little bit, very top right corner, there's two icons. There's a plus icon and an icon with 3 dots. So the plus icon is going to let me follow the podcast. So let me tap on that. It's going to give me a check mark. That means I'm now following that episode, or I'm sorry, that podcast show. And if I click on the 3 dots, that's going to give me a couple of more options here. So I can, since I'm following it, I can unfollow the show. I can get into some settings. I can share the show. Maybe I wanted to share it with a friend that wanted to listen to it. There's a couple of other options here too I can play with. But let me zoom back out. I can play the actual episodes too right from here. So I can play the latest episode, or I can hit play on any one of these episodes and it will start playing for me. So let me tap one actually. And what's going to happen is you're going to notice this kind of little progress bar here, and it's got the time that I have left listening to it, and it's got a pause button. So I can play and pause right from there if I wanted to. Or I could just click on the podcast episode and it should bring me to more information about the episode. So I can see maybe who they're talking to here. It looks like they're talking about Ted Lasso. It's a show on Apple TV Plus, and it will tell me some more information about maybe the guest stars that they're talking to. And I could go down and see more information, like maybe when it was published, which episode it was, how long it was. So that's going to give me a little more information about the episode. I can also get into a player as well. So let me go back to that episode. If you notice down in the bottom right here, there's a little title, and that's got the cover image for the podcast. That's our player that's down in the bottom right corner. If I tap on that, that's going to make our player larger. Now, this may look slightly different on your device because this is an iPad, so the screen is formatted for the larger screen. If you're on an iPhone, it should have the player down there as well that you can tap on, and it should pull up just this on your screen. And from here, you can do a couple of things. You can play or pause. You can jump forward or back, depending on how you have it set up. We have it 15 seconds back or 30 seconds forward. You can also scrub this back and forth if you're wanting to move forward or backwards in the podcast. So if I wanted to skip ahead or skip back, I could drag that back and forth. I can also adjust my volume here.
I find that I use those skip forward and back buttons quite a bit when I'm either skipping ahead through an ad, or if I realize I wasn't paying enough attention and missed something that they said.
Yes, that's one of the buttons that I use most often. And then down here at the bottom underneath the volume, you'll see this 1x. That's actually going to let me change and filter through all of the different playback speeds. So 1x is the standard speed, but if I wanted it faster, I could maybe go to 2 times speed, or I could go slower too. I could go half speed. And all I'm doing is just tapping on those to kind of circle back to 1. I also have the option to do AirPlay. So AirPlay would be if I wanted to cast this to another device. Maybe I had a TV that was connected through AirPlay or a speaker. I could do that and it would cast this to that device where I could listen to it that way. And there's also those 3 dots in the bottom right corner where I could do a couple of things here. I could download the episode, I could play the next episode, play the previous episode, I could save it, I could copy the link. There's a bunch of other things you can do in here, but just a couple of options in case you're wanting to do a little bit more than just play it. Any questions about playing or following a podcast?
No questions so far. Again, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to ask questions out loud, and we'll also have a chance at the end for anyone who has questions to ask them out loud too.
Yes. And you'll find these screenshots in the handout as well. I know I'm a very visual person, so we like to have the screenshots for people. All right, so there is also a way to get into your notification settings on your Apple Podcast app. So that will let you do things like get notified if a new podcast has come up. So let's go to the Listen Now screen. And we're going to click on that little icon up at the top right corner. Come on. There we go. And now you'll notice a couple things to do with your account, but we're going to go to this notification screen because we want to change some of the settings. So this is going to allow us to get a notification whenever a new episode is coming up. So this would be for podcasts that you're following, and that will send a notification to your phone that a new episode has dropped. So if it's toggled to green, that means we will get a new notification. If it's toggled to gray, that means we don't get notifications for new episodes. So I can click on that and that will toggle it on, or it will toggle it off. Any questions about notifications?
No questions so far.
Okay. I think that pretty much covers it in terms of the Apple Podcast app. I recommend getting in there and kind of using it, get a feel for it, because there's, quite a lot of things that you can do with the app and you can explore. There's nowadays, especially, there's tons of podcasts you can listen to. So I recommend kind of getting in there, seeing what's out there. And again, you can really get into some of the nitty gritty. You can search for very specific stuff. So maybe we're redoing the inside of our house and we want some interior design podcasts. There are interior design podcasts out there that you can listen to. So you can kind of scroll through different subjects, genres, maybe you like movies. I'm a big movie person, so I have a couple of movie podcasts that I listen to. Or true crime is a pretty popular one. You can listen to true crime podcasts. They have series, they have news report podcasts. Basically anything you can think of is out there.
Any other questions for Rebecca before we move on to Android? No? Okay.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start my video back up and then switch to the document camera that I have up here. And then I will go ahead and remove the spotlight from Rebecca and put a spotlight on mine instead. Okay. All right. So for those of you who have Android devices, your Android is going to look a little bit more like this here. But again, with Android, it can also look slightly different as far as the colors and things like that go. But in general, as long as it's an Android device, you have it linked with a Google account. And the native app for playing podcasts is called Google Podcasts. And we actually have ours already downloaded and it's in our Google folder here. If you didn't already have it though, you could go to your Play Store and you could download it from the Play Store. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and start and we'll jump right in and take a tour. So I'm gonna go ahead and tap on my folder. Podcast is this one right here, which looks a little bit like all of the Google stuff to me kind of looks a little bit like Simon Says. Let me see if I can make it a little, see if I can zoom in a little bit and make it a little darker so we can see it pop a little bit better on the screen. There we go. I think that looks a little better. Does that look okay, Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we do have the icon for the app in the handout as well.
Yes, we do. And so podcast looks like this. So I'm just going to go ahead and tap on that. I don't think this one looks like much. I mean, I know the Apple one looks like a microphone to me, but this one just kind of looks like, it's got Google's color, so it's got the red, green, yellow, and blue.
It doesn't look like much to me either.
And it's just lines and dots, basically. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and tap on that, and we'll go ahead and get into our Google Podcast app, and I will go ahead and raise this up again so it looks a little better for you. You can see it without the striations in it. Okay, so when you first land here, just like with the Apple devices, along the bottom, the home screen here, you have a couple of options. These are what we basically call your 3 tabs or your 3 screens that you can move through. And we will start out on the home screen. And the home screen basically works as if it were your activity. So this is going to be everything that you still have to listen, that you have not listened to yet from your various podcasts. So for example, up here at the top, we'll just start with our first one. Up here at the top, it's going to tell us our subscriptions. So these are the podcasts that we actually subscribe to, that we have picked previously to subscribe to. And then each one of them is going to have their most recent episode at the top here. And then previous episodes beyond that below that you have not listened to yet. Okay. If you want to listen to right away, you can tap where it says the time down here, and there's a little play button. I don't know how easy that is to see. Let me try to pull it up a little bit higher. Can everyone see that it says 1 hour and 7 minutes there? So if I tap this button here, that's going to go ahead and start playing that podcast for me. And you'll notice it comes up right below down here with a little mini player. And that's telling me that I am playing that episode. If I don't want to play it right away, I certainly don't have to. But the other button that's here, this one here, the little check mark, I'm going to remove it from my queue. This allows you to add it to a queue where if you wanted to basically curate essentially a playlist of podcasts that you want to listen to in succession, you can put them into a queue. And just by tapping that little plus sign, by tapping this little plus sign, it'll put it into a queue. If you want to download the podcast rather than stream it, you can hit the download arrow right here, and that will download it to your device. Over here on the far right, if you notice there's 3 little dots. If I tap on those 3 little dots, I can share this podcast episode with someone else, or I can also mark it as played. I find that sometimes I end up marking things as played if I just go, okay, I'm overwhelmed. There are too many episodes that I've missed. I'm just going to clear them out of this home screen for a while to manage it better. And I might mark something as played. Okay. If I want to, I can tap in the middle, and then that's going to give me more of a description of this particular episode. And it's going to give me kind of like a narrative of what's actually happening in the episode. And then also the biography of the host of the podcast and probably their social media cues for that person. Okay. So if I want to go back from here, I can hit the back button up at the top to go back to that home screen again. So let's go ahead and pick one of these. We'll go ahead and pick Conan Needs a Friend, since Rebecca was using Conan as an example earlier too. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on it and just hear a little bit more, see a little bit more about it. Okay. It looks like Conan's going to do an interview with someone. That sounds great. So if I tap the play button, it's going to start playing. And you probably cannot hear this because I have headphones in. But what you should see is that now it says playing across there.
You may want to brighten the screen just a tad.
Sure. Let's try. Better?
Yes.
Okay. So if you can see now, it says it's playing. So it's playing this podcast. And you'll see down below that this is now changed. And if I wanted to pause the episode, sorry, let me go back for just a second. If I want to pause it, I can just tap this little pause button here, and that'll pause this episode. If you can also see, it's kind of faint. I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a line down here that's blue and it goes all the way across. This is letting me know how far into the podcast I am on this basic view of the player. But if that's not easy enough to see, I can also tap down here on the player specifically and get a larger screen that allows me to control other details about how I'm playing this episode. So if you see here, it's going to tell me I'm 31 seconds into the podcast. It's streamed enough that I can get to about here before it's going to need to pick up more of the episode there. Down here, just like Rebecca said, we have the skips. Ours is 10 seconds back and 30 seconds forward. Our play button in the middle, so we can continue to play or pause. And then we can also make it a favorite by tapping on this little heart over here, and that will make this a favorite episode. So if we ever wanted to come back to it or show it to someone else, we could favorite the episode there. Down below, we have our 1x, which is, as Rebecca said, the normal frame rates for podcasts. But again, if you tap on it, you can pick a different playback speed if you want. And with the Google Google Podcasts, excuse me, you can actually play it a little bit slower than real time and slow it down, or you can speed it up. Okay, I'm going to close there. If we also on the far left side here, oops, if I tap on it, our little button there, that's our queue that we talked about earlier, where we could put episodes into our queue. So if you want to add something to your queue from the player, you can come down here to the little, it looks almost like a little notes with a little triangle next to it, and that will add it to your queue. Okay, down here on the far right are 3 little dots. Will let us find more recommendations, or oh, sorry, let me make that darker. Everybody see that? So it's going to show more podcasts like this or fewer like this and let you share it or mark it as played. Okay, and if you just tap off of that, it'll clear that out. And then the other thing you have down here, this little moon, is if you want to set a timer for sleep. So for me, sometimes I am listening to podcasts right before I go to bed. And if I want it to go for maybe 5 minutes before it stops, because if I fall asleep, I don't want it to go too far into the episode. And I know, when I pick it up the next day, I'll be like, okay, what did I miss? So you can either select end of episode, or you can set a certain sleep timer so that it'll go for, 5-10 minutes and then it'll stop. Okay, so that's the sleep timer. And then this down here that looks like a little screen with a little Wi-Fi signal. This is if you want to cast it. So if you want to cast it to either like a Chromecast or a TV or a car, like we were talking about before, this is how you would set up to cast it to another device. Okay, if I tap up here, I can slide down like that to get rid of the player and put it back down at the bottom. And then I can hit the back button to go back, or I can also hit the 3 little dots up here to get into my settings for every, for the app specific settings. So what do I want to know about Google Podcasts in general, and how much do I want to control Google Podcasts? Okay, any questions so far?
I don't see any questions so far.
Okay, if you have any questions, feel free again to put them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll let you ask your questions. So this is pretty much the home screen. If I go back here, so this is that's what you can do from your home. You can get the description of the podcast. You can get, you can go ahead and play right from there. You can also, let's see, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the Explore section. The Explore section, it works just like the search on the iOS devices, where you can search for new content that you might like, or search for a specific personality or anybody that you'd like to find out if they have a podcast or anything else. So I can browse the different categories such as news and education or business or comedy up here, or say technology, for example. And at the top, they'll have some featured podcasts. So these are ones that the Google Podcast folks have decided to put up at the top. And then you can also see things that are more recent right in here. Okay. And again, these are individual episodes that I could download, or I could play, or I could add to my queue. All right. If I want to search for a specific person, I can put it up in the search bar here at the top. Hoping that looks okay. So for example, if we wanted to search for Elijah Wood, like, is that done? I can just hit search, and then here it'll show the results. So it's going to show both podcasts that he has appeared in, and also individual episodes of different podcasts that he has appeared in, or that he has been at least in the description of that podcast. Okay. So from the search, I can decide if there's something I want to add or learn more about. I can tap on it. So for example, let's pick Elijah Wood, Meet the Actor. So we'll tap on this. And you can see the date that it was published was actually in 2015. But here he is discussing his latest film. And if I wanted to, again, I could just tap play. If I wanted to download this specific episode, I could hit the download button. If I want to add it to my queue, I can hit add to queue. If I come over here, I can share it or mark it as played. Okay, then I can go back. So let's say I want to actually subscribe to a podcast that Elijah Wood has. So let's go with the Meet Elijah Wood, Meet the Actor. So up here at the top where it says show results, the shows are going to be those podcasts specifically, not just the episodes. So if I tap up here and I want to go to Meet the Actor, I can hit subscribe. Can everybody see that up at the top there? Let me make it a little darker here. Show a little better. Is that, oh, that's too dark. Hold on 1 second. I'm gonna find the happy medium here. Okay, so if you see where it says subscribe, that will subscribe me to the podcast itself. Over here, if I tap on the little world, that will load the web page for that podcast. And in this case, it's Apple because it's produced by Apple, or I can share it. Okay. Now, in this case, there's only one episode. So if I subscribe, there's only one episode so far. So again, this goes back to that at the beginning when we talked about, is it something that has more than one episode? How long ago was it made? Is it still current? All of those things. So in this case, I'm going to say, I don't really care so much about this one. I don't think I really want to. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit that back button and come back here. So let's try maybe, does anyone have a famous person or topic that they might want to search for podcasts about? By chance, if you do, feel free to put it in the chat. If not, I'm going to go with my old standby of cats. Okay, so we've got one on space cats. Oh, here, this is interesting. Why do cats purr? And that's a podcast for curious kids. That sounds kind of fun. Let's check that out. So I'm going to go ahead and tap on it. And okay, let's see. That looks interesting. So if I tap on But Why, a podcast for curious kids, you'll see that I can subscribe over here. And then it's going to give me the list of episodes. And I can see that, oh, okay, it's about roughly every 2 weeks or so that they have a new episode. So I can also go ahead and hit subscribe. Now, once I've subscribed, I'm going to make that a little darker so you can see this down here, hopefully. Once I have subscribed, I have some options for the specific podcast. I can tell my app that I want to auto download new episodes, or that I want to get episodes notifications when a new episode is available, or that I want to unsubscribe from the podcast. Okay. Otherwise, my things are the same. I can go to the website, I can share it, or I can start listening to any of the issues that I want to listen to, any of the episodes. Okay. Any questions about Explore and the Explore section?
I don't see anything.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and go back, and we'll go back again. Go back one more time. So I'm gonna go back to my home screen now, and if I update it now, I should probably see the one that I just subscribed to, the But Why. Here it is. It's been added into this home screen. Okay, so that's why there's a difference between the queue and the home list of apps. So if you want to curate a specific list of episodes, you can do that using this button here that's got the little plus sign that says add to queue. Okay, so let's go ahead. I'm going to take us to the library. And our library keeps track of what podcasts we have subscribed to. So here are those that we've subscribed to. It gives us our queue. So again, this is specific episodes that of podcasts that we've added and want to go in, say like a playlist essentially. And they'd be in here. And then it'll also show us if we've downloaded any episodes to our device so that we could listen to them offline. Oops. And then also our history of what we've listened to already. would be here. Okay. And it'll tell you if you've completed a full episode and listened to the whole thing, or if you've just started it and how much time is left. Okay. All right. And that's really all there is to the podcast, to the Google Podcast app. Any questions from anyone about the Google Podcast app
I don't see any.
and how to use it? Okay. So yeah, so it's pretty nice. One thing I would say that I have found, when you start a new podcast and you subscribe to it, if you don't want to listen to all those previous episodes and have them show up in your home screen, this is when I utilize that Marcus played button. So for example, if I didn't want to listen to this one, but I just want to listen to the next one in the series, I can come over here, hit those three little dots, Marcus played, and it takes it out of that home queue or the home landing page, basically. So you can do it one of two ways. You can either add things to the queue so that they show up over here in your library queue and control it that way, or you can use your home area and control your podcast this way for what you want to listen to. Okay. Okay, and that's all I have for that. I'm going to go ahead and I'll jump back out of this. And then I thought maybe if anybody was interested, I'll switch back to my screen over here. And then I thought I'd go ahead and share my screen and I'll show you some examples of the different places that you can search. So let me pull up my browser here. Just bring up Chrome, for example, and then I'll share this with you real quick. So if you're new to podcasting and you're really curious about how to find out what the best podcasts are for whatever topic you're interested in, one of the easiest ways to do that is to do a search. So I'll go ahead and demonstrate that. We'll jump into Google. Okay. So for example, here's Google. I'm going to go ahead and say, let's go to DuckDuckGo, which is another search engine. And then I'm going to go ahead and say, top 10 podcasts, 2021 photography. Or let's do, does anybody have anything they'd like me to try to put in here? Maybe, what did I say? Oh, I said crocheting. And put that implies I know how to spell crochet. Let's do knitting instead. There. Okay. So now I can look through these lists here to see, okay, best knitting podcasts. Okay. And you'll get them both from podcasting sources, like Player FM is actually like a radio show. And then you might find that there are some that come from like magazines or websites that are specific to the hobby as well. So let's see, 15 best knitting podcasts. Let's try this one. Okay, so this is from Gathered, and I'll agree to their cookies. And then here I can see the best knitting podcasts. Okay. And then usually they'll have these sites will usually have a little write-up about each one, along with some pop-up advertisements. But you'll get the idea here too. And if you want to listen to it right from here, of course, like Rebecca said, you don't necessarily need to use the app on your phone or tablet. You could go to the website and listen to it on the specific websites for the podcast, because most podcasts do have websites for their content. Okay. And you can listen to it that way. Okay. And then of course, for recommendations, we of course have a couple of recommendations for you too. And you could ask your library staff, you could ask your friends, your family. A lot of times people will let you know if they think, and I'm the same way with my friends. If I find a podcast that I know someone might be interested in, I'm going to mention it to them. So I'll stop sharing that. Okay. And then we'll go back to our PowerPoint here real quick. And I'm going to go back to sharing that. And then we'll jump through. There we go. I'm just going to jump through these. So when Rebecca mentioned that we have step-by-step with screenshots in the handouts, that's what these are for both Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. Okay. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. And then we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of terms. And Rebecca's going to cover some terms and resources. So I'm going to go ahead and take mine off here, remove my spotlight, and I'll let Rebecca cover this for us.
All right, so terms. We've talked about a couple of words you may not have heard of, but we've kind of made this little list here for your reference. So we talked about streaming a little bit. So streaming refers to any media content that is either live or recorded, which is delivered to computers and mobile devices via the internet and played back in real time. So the important thing to know with streaming something is you need to be connected to the internet at all times. So with downloading, you can download something over the internet connection, but then listen later when you're offline. Streaming means you need to have that constant connection. So you may be able to stream podcasts, movies and TV shows. We know we've heard of those pretty often when it comes to streaming. You can also stream radio as well. Another term we have listed is playlist. So a playlist is a list of video or audio files that can be played back either sequentially or in a shuffled order. So for instance, we have a YouTube playlist of all of our recorded webinars on our YouTube site. So you can get into the tech workshop playlist and see all of the tech workshops. We also have playlists for career webinars. We have a crafty adults playlist. Some children's programming is in playlists as well. And a lot of times podcasts are also in playlists. So you may have certain playlists that you are listening to as well. And sometimes you can listen to those sequentially, or you can make them shuffle themselves. So shuffle would be out of order. So shuffle really could be any random order that the computer decides. Another term we have is native app. So when we refer to native app, that means the app that has already been downloaded on your device by the manufacturer. So native apps could include your settings app. Apple Podcasts is a native app. Google Podcasts, your camera, your text message app. Those are probably going to be native to your device. You may have noticed when you got your device, you had a bunch of apps that were already on there. Those are the ones that are considered native apps. We also talked about downloading. So that would be to transfer, whether that's software, data, stuff like that, that is transferring that from a distant to a nearby computer. So I may be downloading something from the internet. So the internet is asking a far away computer, maybe off in a different state or a different country, to download something from the internet onto my computer. So I could download a podcast, I could download pictures, music, movies, if I'm allowed to. Keep that in mind that some downloads you may have to pay for, some are free, some there's tons of different types of downloading, but when we talk about downloading, that's just like getting something from a distant computer to your computer. You can also download on your device too. So you can download something to your phone or your tablet as well. We didn't cover too much to do with podcatchers, but a podcatcher is maybe something you've heard of before. So that's an application that listeners will use to subscribe and listen to podcasts. So I guess the Apple Podcasts and the Google Podcasts app would be a podcatcher.
Yeah, especially, and so with Stitcher and Overcast, those other ones that we mentioned that might cost money, they're all kind of in that umbrella of that term.
Yeah, it's just sort of a way that to consolidate all of the podcasts that you listen to into one app that you can access. It catches all of those for you.
Yes.
We've also got some resources for you to explore after the class today or whenever you'd like. I have a link to the Apple Podcasts page from the Apple support page. So I really recommend the Apple support page when it comes to questions about iOS devices or Apple computers. So there's a listening guide for podcasts. There's also how to listen to podcasts on a computer. So that would be a guide for either an Apple desktop or laptop computer instead of listening on your device. There's also a beginner's guide to podcasts from wired.com. We also included a GCF Learn Free link. GCF Learn Free is a great resource that we draw on pretty often for kind of tutorials. They have a lot of great visuals, so that's a good one to explore. And of course, Google has their own podcast page that we've linked to as well. Any questions about terms or resources? Or anything else, really?
Okay. And then we have a couple of recommended podcasts here. So let me see if I can, can I jump out here? Since I'm still in here, I'm gonna have to stop sharing for just a second so I can put both cameras back up here. And then be able to get into it. Okay, so I'll start my video as well. Okay, and now I will share. So I have two. I have a third one but we only picked two for this to make sure we limited ourselves a little bit. So.
Well, I'm interested in the third one now.
Okay. Well, yeah. I'll mention that to you too. So Travel with Rick Steves it's basically a weekly podcast where he goes for, basically it's set up in an interview and radio show where he has guest experts that are usually involved in some facet of the travel industry. And then they talk about particular places, and then he interviews folks that have done some really fun things or traveled around the world. For example, the most recent episode, I believe, was about Christmas traditions in various countries in Europe. And so he invites some of his guides or people he knows on to talk about what those traditions are. And he also has, as Rebecca mentioned, a PBS show that they film. And also they have guides for different museums and places that you can also download from their website. So I enjoy that each week. And then Wait, Don't Tell Me is a news radio comedy quiz show that's actually usually recorded in Chicago, though they do travel all over the country. And it's a call-in show with a combination of trivia questions for their panelists. And then they also have contestants that call in and they try to make some comedy out of the news from the week. And then the third one is actually called Ologies. And it's a very interesting podcast where the host basically interviews people about their passions of whatever subject they're most passionate about or involved in researching and things like that. So recently she had someone on who their passion is foraging. So they talked all about foraging and, forageology in a way. And it just covers a wide variety of topics that are just kind of interesting to learn about. So there, you got my third one too.
Yes, I know I've heard you talk about that one a couple times.
Yes. And we also listened to the Slate Hit Parade, which is a really interesting, if anybody's at all interested in history, music history, and like Billboard chart topping hits and things. Hit Parade is another one where they usually do a specific genre of music. So the most recent one we listened to on our most recent road trip was about basically like one hit wonders for the holidays, or whether or not those people had the musicians had other hits, but that the radio plays and streaming plays for their holiday songs were larger or more popular than their other hits. So it's a very interesting show. So, but anyway, I'll let Rebecca tell us about hers here. Oops, come on. There we go.
Okay, so you've probably seen these on the Apple Podcasts thing that I just demoed, but I recommend Conan O'Brien's podcast. It's called Conan O'Brien Needs a Friend. It's sort of similar to the interviews he does. Well, he did. He's no longer on late night, but he does interviews with celebrity guests. And he also brings in his assistant and people that work with him on his crew. And it's sort of a more funny, goofy version of his late night interviews. And he just talks to people that are his friends, basically. I really like his interview style and his sense of humor. So I recommend Conan O'Brien's podcast. Another one that I really like is called Unspooled. And there's 2 seasons now, but the first season was with Paul Scheer and Amy Nicholson. Paul Scheer is an actor and he also enjoys movies. Amy Nicholson is a film critic based in LA. And what they do is they pick a movie from the AFI's top 100 movies of all time, and they kind of dissect why they think it's on that list. And they talk to industry experts, artists, actors, and it's a really great podcast if you like movies. The second season has sort of transitioned into them deciding what movies they think belong on the list or that should be considered for the top 100 movies. So the most recent episode I just listened to is about The Matrix. So it's fun to kind of listen to that. And I'm a big movie person, so I like when people talk about, especially the movies that I really like, just to see, what other opinions are out there. And they're really good at talking about the movies critically, and I don't know, I just really like it. It's a great one.
All right. Let me see if I can get there we go. Okay, so that is everything we have for today for covering podcasts and how to find and listen to them. And I do want to mention a couple of things that are coming up. Rebecca will be running our Get It. Oh, wait, were we going to have you do this slide? We were, weren't we? Okay, I'll let you take over.
It's okay. Yeah, so in January, in the beginning of January, we're still going to be online. So we're still going to be doing tech webinars in this format. The first 2 courses are going to be centered around Apple computers. The first course is just a basics. It's getting started with Apple computers. And you don't have to have an Apple computer to attend. If you're interested in getting an Apple computer or just interested in seeing what they're all about, you can also attend. Then on the 11th, we're going to have more of an advanced topic concerning Apple computers. We're going to talk about files and folders. So sort of the equivalent to the digital files class that we've held that centers around Windows computer. This one is going to be centered around Apple computers. So I definitely recommend that as well if you're interested in Apple computers. And then, of course, we're going to be covering intro to cloud storage and intro to Pinterest. Pinterest is one of those social media sites that is more visual, kind of crafty based. We're going to be talking about that in January.
I just realized something too before I move on to the next slide. In January, our specialty tech is actually going to be with the Attorney General's office. It will not be recorded, but it is going to be on January 24th at 7 p.m. And they'll be coming to talk to us about the internet and how to stay safe on the internet and what the Attorney General's office can do for you if you've been the victim of identity theft or any kind of scams online. So, but I forgot to put the slide in here. So thank you for letting me interject there for a second, Rebecca.
Yes. I do see a question in the chat about the touchpads. We will be touching on touchpads. So we will be explaining a little bit about how they work, especially when it comes to right clicking, because that's a super important thing to learn how to do on an Apple computer. We won't dive too much into that, but we will be covering it.
Thank you.
And then, of course, we have our contact info up here. If you want to reach out at any time, feel free. We have our emails and our phone. And of course, if you call the library, anybody here at the library will be able to assist you with your question or get you to the right person that can help answer your questions for you.
And then as Rebecca mentioned this earlier in our webinar today, we do have a YouTube channel with playlists from our various technology workshops, as well as Crafty Dells, business, career, even I think there's even some story times and some teen information up there. So if you go to champaign.org/YouTube, you can see all of, it's a central landing point where you can get into those playlists. And we will have this one up there, probably before next week. And we'll send out the video for today. And this is where they all go afterwards. So if you do want to look up any content from before, or you want to rewatch today's webinar, you certainly can. And if you want to slow it down and watch a section and then pause it and then practice yourself, that's usually what I do with webinar content. As Rebecca said, she's a visual learner, so am I, but I'm also kinesthetic. So I have to watch someone do it, then try to do it myself. So that's how I like to do it. But however you best learn, we do have this as a resource up there for you. And then we also have other options. We have live chat. Anytime the library is open, you can ask questions via live chat. You can also reach out to our whole department through the librarian@champaign.org email address. And then we also have our Book a Librarian service. And the Book a Librarian service is great if you'd like one-on-one help with a certain technology topic, anything from how do I use my smartphone to what is cloud storage. And even if you've taken one of our workshops before and you want individual help with something that's been covered in a workshop, we're totally happy to do that for you. Or if it's a topic outside of that, feel free to let us know, send us an email, or go to champaign.org/book-a-librarian and put it in there. And if we can't answer your question, we will give you some resources for who might be able to. Okay, and I think that's everything I had. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing the PowerPoint at least, and we'll come back to us. And we're here to answer questions. So if anybody has other questions, we've got a couple minutes here that we can either answer questions about podcasts or other topics. And if not, we'll say goodbye and
you'll be on your way with your podcasts. You can go and find something to listen to this afternoon, maybe.
And if you come for some of the other workshops in the future, hopefully you'll tell us what podcasts you like that you've had fun listening to. And because we both of it, we wouldn't teach this class if we didn't like podcasts and learning what other people have been listening to. So,
yeah, we're always looking for recommendations.
Yes, yeah, from both, and we do ask our coworkers several times as well.
Very often.
The Great Indoors was actually a coworker's recommendation on an interior design podcast. That you may have seen on our slides too. So yeah. Any other questions for anyone? We're happy to help. I'm looking forward to having Rebecca teach our Apple files and folders workshop. That is new. It will be debuting on the 11th of January. And we'd love to have you for either of those. And also for the internet safety and security on the 24th, especially because that one will not be recorded. So, and they usually provide some really good information. So, all right. Okay, doesn't look like we have any other questions. So we'll go ahead and say goodbye. And thank you for coming today. And we hope to see you again soon, either in the library or here in our virtual world.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for tuning into CUI's TV. We hope you enjoyed the show. This video can be accessed anytime on youtube.com. In the YouTube search bar, type in UPTV6 and look for their microphone logo. We hope you will join us again next week for more local, engaging content designed specifically for Champaign County older adults. Take